Hi class, we are doing types of reproduction and cytoplasmic inheritance. We have already kind of talked a little bit about types of reproductions when we were looking at the diversity unit. So we'll kind of go over that a little bit more. So when we're looking at your types of reproductions, there's the two types, asexual and sexual reproductions. The main thing we kind of talked about in the diversity unit is that asexual requires one parent while sexual requires two parents. When you are talking about asexual, it makes kind of a copy of itself genetically and then splits in half, very similar to mitosis, where sexual reproduction needs your sperm to fertilize the egg. A big thing between the two as well is in asexual reproductions, the offsprings are going to be genetically identical, where in sexual reproductions, they are going to be different, which allows for the variation. It's why you don't look identical to your parents. Yeah, some people do, but not generally, no. Okay, there's some pros and cons that go with each of them. The idea with the sexual reproduction, it's efficient. It doesn't require a lot of time. It doesn't require a lot of energy. But however, because they are genetically identical, if something was to come in, say a virus, a fungus, a bacteria, and start killing off those offsprings, every single one of those species organisms would be killed because they are genetically identical. Whereas for sexual reproduction, that genetic variation allows for species to survive, because if something is harmful to one, it might not be harmful to the other because they are not identical genetically. That being said, the process to create that organism through sexual reproduction takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of time. If you think of humans, think of how long it takes to for a female to be pregnant. So it does take time for the species. Okay, and then the examples are in below. Some species or types of species can flip between asexual and asexual depending on what they are, and we kind of talked about them in the last unit. Okay, so we're going to move on to cytoplasmic DNA. And again, we kind of talked about this last unit as well. So the idea that your chloroplast and your mitochondria both contain DNA. And so the reason they contain this circular loop of DNA is because they were once considered their own organisms, and then another larger cell engulfed another cell. And we talked about the endosymbiosis in the protist note as well. So just kind of reviewing over how they got their own DNA, why they're so important and they have their own DNA within the cell is because without it, we wouldn't have cellular respiration and photosynthesis. We would not have that energy. If we didn't have cellular respiration, we couldn't take glucose or stored energy and convert it to usable energy that our bodies need. Without chloroplasts, plants would not be able to take sunlight and convert it to energy that not just they need, but every other living species needs as well. So that's why these two organelles are considered so important. When you're looking at cytoplasmic inheritance in different types of reproduction, it depends on if it's asexual or sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, because the cell is dividing directly in half, the organelles are going to just get split 50-50. So you have the parent cell here, your two daughter cells, they each get half. Which chloroplast or mitochondria, or both, depending which type of organism you're looking at, is just split at random between the cells. Okay, and cytoplasmic inheritance is going to be a little bit different when you look at sexual reproduction because you have to have that fertilization happening. That's where you will have, usually, but not always, the mitochondrial tends to be more on the maternal side. And what that means is that the, say, mitochondrial DNA is only from the female gametes. In some species of plants, it's paternal, which means it comes from the father, and then there are the odd species of plants that can come a little bit mixed of both. But in humans, what happens is because sperm has very little organelles in it, and the mitochondria is used to help kind of move the sperm tail, it doesn't actually fertilize into the female egg. So that egg is primarily made up of the mom's mitochondria, and that's what's given into the offsprings. There are the rare instances where some of the mitochondrial does make its way into there, and so some offsprings will have the few mitochondrial organelles that have come from dad, but primarily it is maternal inheritance. Okay, so why does this maternal and fraternal inheritance cause genetic variation. So why does the chloroplast and mitochondria cause like genetic variation with just those organelles? So when you're looking at the chloroplasts and the mitochondria, they can be genetically different. Mutations happen, things can happen along the way. And so not necessarily they're always the same. In plants, it is seen different than in animals. Plants, if there is a genetic mutation in the chloroplast, it usually causes them to be colorless or being seen as the white side of it. And in doing so, you can actually visually see that. So when you get the splitting of the organelles through your cytokinesis, it's at random. And so this is where you get all those different patterns on the plants, usually in like your hostas, but it's not always, where you can see some of the leaves are going to be completely green, some of them would be completely white, others would have a mixed pattern. And that has to do with the mutation in the chloroplast and that it randomly separates during mitosis. And so that's why no two plants will have identical patterning, because it's constantly based on how the mitochondria get split in the process of mitosis. In humans, when there's a mutation in the mitochondrial DNA, that usually leads to some sort of disorder because that mitochondria is making this energy, which is in the form of what's called ATP here in the middle. Don't worry too much about that, but it's responsible for how our body functions. So it affects lots of disorders there, and they're kind of just a list in some of the pictures, but you don't have to worry too much about it, okay? It can lead to seizures, it can lead to organ failures, and so we really need that mitochondrial DNA to function properly so that a person or an organism is able to sustain a healthy life. And so what scientists have been able to come up with is, it's called, kind of like, common name is DNA egg swapping, but the actual scientific is a pronuclear transfer. And so from there, if a mother has a mutation in her mitochondrial DNA, it is pretty much 100% her child will have that disorder as well. If the father has it, they're pretty much almost at a 0% chance. There's that slight little one, but majority of the time the father doesn't pass it to the child. So now if you have this mother here that's got a mitochondrial disorder, how does she prevent her child from getting it? Because the chances, she's very high. So they have this process called pronuclear transfer, and they are able to take a donor egg and insert the nuclear genetic information from a parent couple. This all happens after fertilization. Then the new kind of egg and fertilized egg will have the mitochondrial DNA from the donor couple, but the genetic information in the nucleus comes from the parent couple. So this is where you now have three parents genetically for a child. And so there are some ethical issues that arise from this situation, but they are all able now to prevent that child from having a mitochondrial disorder. Okay, there is 2 other videos that are kind of linked on our D12 page. One is literally showing the cellular stage of this pronuclear transfer, and another one is kind of an interesting TED Talk if you have the time and would like to watch it. Okay, thanks class.